Good morning to everybody, and good morning, Mr. Minister. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here and this Sunday morning audience at the JLF. There is so much to discuss with you, but I know that William Dalrymple, who knows you very, very well, will not allow us to go beyond 1 hour that we would actually love to go. I'm going to take you through several aspects of your work and life, if I may. But I do want you to start with something which I am personally aware of. I also lived for a brief while in Poland in the mid-80s, a very difficult, a very challenging time, both for the country and for the politics of the country. And you were growing up in that Poland, in communist Poland. And suddenly from communist Poland, you were sitting in Oxford, where you were reading PPE along with the likes of Boris Johnson and David Cameron. Tell us about the beginnings of this wonderful journey.
Well, yes, I am grateful for the timing that was my share, namely old enough to experience communism, as you say. I became a refugee in Britain when General Jaruzelski imposed martial law. The last stage of communism was military dictatorship.
Yes.
And Britain was very generous in giving me a grant to study. And then I was ready to return to free Poland and spend most of my professional life there, when Poland was just taking off for the 35, so far, most successful years in our 1,000-year history. And there are lessons for others in that, I think. From being one of the poorest countries in Europe, we've just joined the $1 trillion economy, and we are, for the first time, being invited to the G20 this year.
Absolutely.
There are threats, but on the whole, it's been very successful. Several adventures in the meantime.
And you've been part of this journey very closely, but before you came back to Poland and became a deputy minister, a defense minister at a very young age, you were already a well-known journalist and a writer, and you were in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen. What takes a young Pole to go off to Afghanistan and sit in the caves?
And reporting from Afghanistan for the Statesman of Calcutta.
And that is where your first article appeared? One of the first.
One of the first. My editor was Mr. Sunandat Kdattare.
He's a very well-known journalist.
Oh, there you are. And the Russians were trying to suppress another nation. I suppose we were sympathetic to the Afghan Mujahideen, and they were saying, we want to liberate not only Afghanistan from communism. They managed to do that, but there have been some externalities, let's say. But it was a very important experience for me, to see the cruelty of war, the price you pay for war.
But you went there out of a romantic notion, a kind of Lord Byron going to Greece, or was it your visceral antipathy with the Soviet Union?
It was all that, plus it was a way to make your name in journalism. Plus, an advance from the Spectator magazine to pay off my Bullingdon debts also helped.
But since this is a literary festival, I can't resist reminding you that you actually published an interview of Graham Greene in The Statesman.
Yeah, he is one of my favorite authors. He should have received the Nobel Prize for Literature. I think The Quiet American, as we've already discussed, The Comedians and The Honorary Consul.
Brilliant writing.
And, The Quiet American was published in 1954, and he predicted everything.
Yes. But maybe, looking back, maybe it's not so good to keep getting the Nobel Prize. All sorts of people get it nowadays.
Well, they didn't give it to Tolstoy. And they gave it to Churchill for literature, remember?
That's right. So today we are in a world in which the problems between Poland and Russia have not ended. But I think it's very important for an Indian audience to understand what is the relationship which, you look at the map, you're two neighboring countries, so to speak, Slavic countries, and yet there is this long history of antipathy, and it has carried on despite the fact that the Soviet Union dissolved. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, I would, because I think it's key to dissect this. You say Slavic countries, and it's true. The ethnic core of where the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Poles come from is similar.
Right.
But as you know in India, and as they know in Britain and Ireland, language or even ethnic core do not determine politics. You can have the same language, like the English and the Irish, but have very fundamental political allegiances. And a bit of history is necessary. So there were these Slav principalities north of the Black Sea.
Right.
Most of them under loose sovereignty of the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantium. And then in the 13th century, the Mongol hordes swept all of Eurasia. And some of them stayed under Mongol control for much longer than others. So the Muscovy started as a state by being a tax collector for the Mongols. And the Muscovites were most successful because they were most cruel and most efficient in extracting value from their population. Whereas Ukrainians went the other way. They became part of the Lithuanian, the Duchy of Lithuania, and then for 400 years, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which had a parliament, which had rights of nobility, that sort of thing. And the political cultures completely went sideways. So in Russia, you still have a society organized top to bottom. And in Ukraine, Belarus, you have a tradition of organizing bottom to top. And that's a fundamental cultural and political difference.
So during the Soviet Union, this was suppressed, this natural tendency.
The Russians have been trying to culturally exterminate Ukrainians already in Tsarist times. So publishing books in Ukrainian was banned. Under the Soviet Union, they actually carried out an artificial famine. There's an author called Anne Applebaum who's written an excellent book about it.
I think you are familiar with her.
I'm familiar with her. I commend you the book Red Famine. The NKVD troops went district by district, sealing them off, and then waiting until everybody died, and at the same time exterminating 200,000 bearers of Ukrainian culture. This is all to prove that actually these are just our peasants. Ukraine doesn't exist as a separate country. And Mr. Putin, as you must have heard, claims the same thing.
He still says the same thing.
So it's a classic colonial narrative. This is not a real people. These are just provincial Russians. They will be delighted if we reconquer them. And as we've seen, reality has hit back.
And this hasn't changed despite the dissolution of the Soviet Union, because there was a moment in history, perhaps during the days of Yeltsin and perhaps early Putin, when there was a thought that Russia would be positively engaged with the West, and there could be a different landscape of united Europe altogether. Was that moment missed? Was there a real opportunity?
It actually it's more complicated than that. Bolsheviks, while simultaneously exterminating free Ukrainian elites, flirted with Ukrainian nationalism. So Ukraine, within the Soviet Union, received large borders. Ukraine, if you remember, was a founding member of the United Nations. and was a separate member, in which it's a paradox. Ukraine has been a member as Ukraine longer than Russia has been as Russian Federation.
So from the 30s, I suppose.
And then, of course, until the around 2011, it looked like Russia wanted. I took part in the negotiations. Russia was saying that Russia wants an association agreement with the European Union. And Ukraine was considering the same in parallel. At the time when Russia annexed Crimea, Ukraine was constitutionally a neutral country.
So they could not have joined NATO.
No. So all this talk about NATO being the reason for the war is untrue, is a pretext.
And then I mean, Putin, as you said, you were engaged with Russia at that time, hoping that there would be some sort of rapprochement.
Sure, and I'm criticized to this day for having made the attempt. I saw Putin in the Kremlin. We had local border traffic between this exclave of Kaliningrad, 1 million Russians there, and the neighboring Polish regions. One of the most interesting aspects, we had thousands of Russian local councillors and mayors of small towns coming to see booming Polish provincial towns and seeing, wow, self-government works. We had the visit of the Patriarch of Russia, signing an agreement on reconciliation with our church, consciously modeled on the reconciliation between the Polish and German churches. We had groups of historians establishing the facts of history, publishing a huge tome of, establishing the facts.
And there's a reconciliation of some very basic historical...
On the basis of truth, which is the only way you can do it.
He visited Katyn?
And not only that, Vladimir Putin was the first leader of Russia to come to Gdańsk on the anniversary of the Second World War, which meant that he was joining the European narrative of where and why the Second World War started, instead of having the Stalinist version. And he was so close to condemning the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact.
That's a big thing.
And then he visited Katyn, the place of the massacre of our officer corps by the Soviets in 1940. And then partly, I think, as a result of Arab Spring, he didn't like the sight of Mubarak in an iron cage and Gaddafi crawling out of that drain pipe. And then there were protests in Moscow against his return to the Kremlin. He decided that this was too dangerous and that Russia would become a rival pole of integration, that Russia no longer wanted to join the West. It was his decision. We gave him every encouragement to be on a convergence course with us.
And you wrote later, not too long ago, in a New York Times essay that Putin's long-term goals have not changed. And they are, to quote you, to rebuild the Russian Empire, undermine transatlantic security guarantees, divide the West, and weaken the United States. Is that...
Well, my old colleague and sparring partner, Sergei Lavrov, put it rather amusingly when he was asked to whose advice does President Putin listen these days? And Lavrov said he has 3 advisors: Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, and Catherine the Great.
And Mr. Lavrov survived?
In regimes like that, you can't just resign when you disagree with the policy. You serve at the pleasure.
You have to continue to work. So, I mean, before we broaden this, since we are so close to the Ukraine crisis, where does the whole thing stand? I mean, the war has now gone on longer than the war between Soviet Union and the Nazis. And so where is there any sign? Because we hear of a 28-point plan, which became a 20-point plan. Is there a hope of a ceasefire? Do you see any movement towards that? Or is it going to just drag on?
Well, I think originally Vladimir Putin wanted his special operation to be more like Caracas than Kiev.
So 3 days.
And Bogota, and it didn't work. And we now estimate that the war has cost Russia in military expenses and in additional costs at least $1 trillion. $1 trillion. It's
And a lot of men.
And we think last year alone it was 300,000 dead and wounded. There are days on which Russia loses more than 1,000 men per day. And Ukrainian losses are much smaller. Of course, Ukraine has fewer resources. But I think Putin made several mistakes. The way he has treated people on occupied territories is the way with unbelievable cruelties, stealing children, arresting at the slightest sign of resistance, Russifying the culture, telling the Ukrainians that if you give up, you will be wiped out culturally. And so the Ukrainians understood that this is for them, an existential war. And of course, right now, there are large parts of many Ukrainian cities which, in a temperature of minus 20 degrees, have no electricity and no heating. Imagine living in one of those apartment blocks, minus 20, no electricity.
Because they're attacking the infrastructure.
Because they are deliberately targeting area, heating and electricity plant.
So you don't see a ceasefire on the horizon?
I think Vladimir Putin still wants to achieve his ultimate aim, which is to control all of Ukraine. And when he continues to say, it's Zelensky that's the problem, what he means is that he wants to create a political crisis in Ukraine, which would allow him to place someone in charge that would follow his wishes. It's not just about territory, it's about the geopolitical orientation of Ukraine.
But Mr. Minister, if Putin thought this was a 3-day special operation, Mr. Trump thought that with one phone call he's going to end the war. So even that hasn't happened. And there is a sort of big fiction that Steve Witkoff is, doing something, and Kushner and Witkoff go and talk to Putin, and something is in the pipeline. And
well, you've been in the business of diplomacy, and I'm in the business of diplomacy. We don't negotiate only with friends.
Of course.
You negotiate with rivals and sometimes with enemies. So I don't blame anybody for talking to the enemy. It's the quality of the deal that you produce that matters.
And there's also a kind of escalation happening in terms of a hybrid war. Poland had drones coming over. You had other events. A lot of drones were seen over Germany, Denmark, and all that. So is that part of this war? Is it?
Absolutely. And remember, hybrid war isn't just some nuisance on the internet, although we have plenty of that. We have a cognitive assault on the minds of our internet users, particularly on our young people. Mm-hmm. The Russians are spending billions, also in the so-called global south, trying to affect, promote their narratives. But it's much more serious than that. So we've had attacks all over Europe, including in Poland, on our hospitals. When a hospital's emergency line is blocked remotely, people can die. Mr. Putin has sent us death squads. People have died in Germany, in Britain, in Qatar, in Poland. There was an attempt to kill people. saboteurs were sent to blow up a section of a railway line on a high escarpment. Fortunately, they were incompetent. One of the charges out of 3 did not explode, and the train didn't derail. But the intention was there, all right. And they recruit, we know, the particular unit of the GRU, of the Russian military intelligence, that does it. They recruit so-called one-time agents on social media. They pay them first a couple of $1,000 to photograph a target, and then 10, 20,000 bucks for setting fire to it. And we've had, all over Europe, we've had a number of such incidents. Literally, day before yesterday, we charged people who put incendiary devices in courier packages that if they'd exploded, they could have brought down airliners. This is what we are dealing. This is how friendly, how peace-loving Russia is right now.
And one aspect which is, of immediate interest to India, given, the India-Russia relationship, the current stage of the India-US relationship, there is a lot of involvement of China in this war by supporting what they call the limitless partnership with Russia. Would you speak to that?
When Chairman Mao went to Moscow, was it 40s, late 40s, Stalin kept him waiting for several weeks.
For a meeting.
For a meeting, okay? The relationship now is the other way around. The Chinese give all the outward sign of respect, but in fact, Russia has become dependent on Chinese supplies of dual goods use, white goods, internet, cyber services, and so on. My friend and mentor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, said many years ago that the strategic choice for Russia is to be either an ally of the West, but then certain rules apply, you don't invade your neighbors, or become a vassal of China. And I think China must be very pleased with itself because without having to do much, the Russians are spending their national wealth on Chinese goods and becoming weaker and weaker every year. So China has become the dominant partner, and I think probably likes it exactly as it is. Having a Russia that is anti-Western, weaker, but not so weak as to actually fail.
But also Russia gains. I mean, they're selling a lot of things to China, including oil.
At a huge discount. What we are particularly worried about is what kind of nuclear and missile technologies it is giving to North Korea in return for the ammunition, for the artillery pieces, and for the soldiers that North Korea provides to the Russian war effort.
And suppose there was to be an end to this entire Ukraine conflict, would this Russia-China partnership roll back?
The partnership is based on self-interest. Geopolitically speaking, it is harmful to Russia because it weakens her grip on the Far East. For the first time in 150 years, under Vladimir Putin, the port of Vladivostok was opened to Chinese goods.
Oh, that's right. You wrote very evocatively that he want, instead of conquering Kyiv, he might lose Vladivostok.
And Chinese mapping agencies now call Vladivostok by its original name, which is Hanshenwei. But the point is that the alliance makes sense for both leaders. The interests of Russia and the interests of Vladimir Putin are not aligned. The interest of Russia would be to become a more developed country, a stronger country, living in peace with the West and its neighbors. The first interest of Vladimir Putin is to stay in power. And for that, he needs to continue the war, and for that, he needs China.
Amazing. You've also been a very strong proponent of a strong Europe, united Europe, and it was feared when Donald Trump came that, you know, the Indo-Pacific may detract him from Europe, or a war with China may detract him from Europe, but that hasn't happened. But the transatlantic relationship is falling apart.
Well, actually, from our perspective, we have 10,000 US troops in Poland. They are actually developing their bases. We have a missile defense base. And, you know, we are on the eastern flank. We need the US partnership more than others. But yes, I think Donald Trump is encouraging Europeans to develop stronger defense. I give him credit, not only for encouraging us from the beginning of his first term to spend more, but also for encouraging us to be more autonomous, to be capable of addressing lower order emergencies, be it in North Africa or in the Balkans, on our own. And here I think the European and US interests actually coincide.
And has the defense spending gone up? I know Poland is spending a lot on defense.
Oh yeah, we have doubled as Europe our defense spending since Trump won, and at the Hague summit we have pledged to double again. We have pledged ourselves to be spending 3.5% of GDP on defense, which is what the United States spends. And since our economy is comparable to the US, by the end of the decade, we will be building a very strong army. And remember, we are only committed to the defense of Europe. We don't have a global military empire. And Poland, of course, is ahead of the curve. We are spending 4.7% of GDP on defense already. And that's because we trust Russia. When Russia threatens us, threatens anybody, you should trust it.
But perhaps countries which are a little further away trust Russia less and they spend less.
It's true. The sense of security and insecurity is unevenly spread across Europe. You know, in Portugal has never been conquered by Russia and never will be, which is why it's so magnificent that Portugal expresses so much solidarity with Ukraine. And when we consider the threats emanating from the south, we also express our solidarity. We've had troops in Chad, in Mali, and other places, because we recognize that we are a small, rich continent, and the era of the end of history and of eternal peace is over, and we need to defend our freedoms.
But yet, and I suppose this is for historical reasons, Poland doesn't want to contribute troops to a future sort of peacekeeping mission in Ukraine, while UK and France and others want to do that?
We have, in proportion to GDP, we think we are one or two countries who have contributed the most to Ukraine.
And the refugees,
well, never mind the refugees. We've given Ukraine more tanks than Germany, France, and Britain put together. And we still have more than those three countries put together. This shows you how badly Western Europe has disarmed itself. We were the first country to give Ukraine fighter jets, and we are in the process of transferring another. This time it will be 14 MiG-29s, and so on. We are in the process of transporting our 48th national donation to Ukraine. But on troops, well, I don't want to be too brave in making parallels, but say there was trouble in Southern Ireland, would the UK be so keen to send troops
Yeah, there are historical.
Would you like the British to be back in?
No, 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 no.
Right. So we were the same country with Ukraine for 400 years, and at that time it wasn't an equal relationship, and so we think it's better that we provide all the logistical support for such an operation rather than be physically present on the ground.
Yeah, you've also been a very strong proponent of building up European defense capabilities. I remember you wrote, of course, admittedly not as foreign minister, that Europe without defense capabilities will be a toothless superpower. So is that gap being covered, and is it possible to cover it quickly enough to help Ukraine, given the vicissitudes of United States?
So Europe has been very helpful in encouraging member states to rearm. So, for example, when nation states cross the permitted budget deficit, if it's spent on building up defenses, the European Commission gives you a pass. In addition, we now have this SAFE mechanism. It's a huge loan of a total, I think, is 180, my ambassador confirms, 180 billion euros spread over 70 years, very low interest rate, for buying equipment and for standing up new defense factories. So we will reindustrialize and rearm as Europe. What I'm in favor of is also Europe as the European Union having some defense capabilities. I would like to see a European Legion composed of a brigade or two, manned by volunteers from member states, paid for from the European budget, with common rules of engagement under a single command, with the political authority of the Foreign Affairs Council, capable. It would never be capable of standing up to Vladimir Putin. But another Gaddafi or some warlord in the Balkans, we should be capable of dealing by ourselves.
And keep the US out.
For the emergency, that the US is otherwise engaged, which is entirely imaginable.
And also, I think as part of that, and it's been a bit controversial coming from a Poland politician, you said that you fear a pacified Germany more than a rearmed Germany.
Germany is already present on the eastern flank. They are developing a tank brigade in Lithuania. They are in the various institutions NATO institutions that we have in Poland. Until recently, a German Patriot missile was defending the airfield and the city, which is the hub for the transshipment to Ukraine. Believe it or not, we've already had exercises of tank brigades, and they were actually Leopard tanks on both the German side and the Polish side. And the Polish tank brigade was commanded by a German general, and the German tank brigade was commanded by a Polish general. So as long as Germany is a member of NATO, of the EU, and is ruled by predictable pro-European political forces, they're a close ally.
So to some extent, the memories in Europe of the World War and...
Well, we have more, we could export some of our memories to you. We produce more history than can be consumed locally. But I believe that the task of politicians is to look to the future while remembering the past.
Absolutely. A couple of more questions, and then we'll open up to the audience. This morning, there was news that Donald Trump has put additional tariffs of 10% on 6 countries who sent delegates to Greenland or troops to Greenland for an exercise.
I hope someone will explain to him that we are a customs union and you can only put tariffs on the EU as a whole.
So we are looking for volunteers to go and explain that to President Trump. And the last sort of broad brush question which I would like to ask you is, you spoke in Security Council, you spoke in other places, that you believe that there has been a complete collapse of international order, and that never again commitment that was there given by the world after Second World War is lost. Any chance of retrieval?
Well, a Security Council without India in it, the most populous country on earth, does clearly not reflect the correlation of forces in the world. But a Security Council which, instead of enforcing the peace, is treated by some members as an immunity mechanism for conducting aggressive wars, it has clearly also lost a sense of mission. And you know, Poland is a medium-sized country. We don't want the world to be ruled by the law of the jungle again, because smaller countries tend to be victims.
Correct.
Of such a state of the world. So we will be the last to undermine the principles of rule of law and of multilateralism.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. I think there are lots of hands going up. So we have, please keep your questions, only questions, and very short. We'll happy to publish your essays elsewhere. The gentleman there, second row. And maybe we'll take a couple together. Would you?
Yeah, wonderful session, sir. I had a question. So basically, Asians and Europeans have had a very fractured relationship, so to say. Ukrainians have voted against us Indians for 6 times in United Nations, for example. So among all the Europeans, Russians are the ones we deal with and trust the most. So why should we ever kind of trust whatever the Europeans are saying, especially the Western Europeans at all?
Okay. Maybe you'd like to respond to that.
Well, be careful, because Vladimir Putin has been saying that Ukrainians are dear brothers and part of the same nation, and now he's, as we speak, he's bombarding Kiev. I hope you don't have to experience Russian trustworthiness on your own skin.
Right. One question there in the middle.
As the American hegemony ends, so we see the concept of modern nation state getting, very diminished. So in that concept, how do you see Europe getting out of NATO and standing up to Russia? Like, what is the probability in the near future?
All right. We'll take a couple more along with that. This gentleman, yeah, behind you. Yeah, carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. You briefly touched upon the fact that NATO's expansion was something that may not have triggered the war. But that is.
In my view, it had nothing to do with it.
So NATO was not. So NATO had not. I mean, NATO's expansion has got nothing to do with the war.
Look, I was at the NATO summit in 2008 in Bucharest when Ukraine, before they changed their constitution, applied to join NATO, and they were rejected. And nothing was happening that would suggest that NATO would admit Ukraine. So Russian fear that Ukraine might hypothetically, in 10 or 20 years' time, again apply to NATO is not a sufficient reason for an invasion. Ukraine was not in the process of joining NATO. And at the time, I will repeat this, because people forget, at the time of the Anschluss of Crimea, Ukraine was constitutionally a neutral country. This is a war about reconquering your colony. Vladimir Putin has decided that he wants to rebuild the Russian Empire and that he needs Ukraine's resources, both industrial, natural resources, and human, for Russia to be great again. But you know, these concepts of making countries great again are very dangerous on the international scene.
I'm going to move to the back because people get ignored at the back. There's a hand out there, please. Quickly send the mic.
But there was a question before that I...
Yeah, there was a question
sir.
before.
Hi, sir.
How can NATO
you asked about the transatlantic relationship. Look, I think NATO will continue. It'll be more limited. So we are now, as Europeans, paying for the war, for Ukraine's defense of its territory, and we are also paying for our rearmament. But the US is still indispensable for us. The nuclear umbrella, the global intelligence gathering, and the global reach, as the Americans shown in Latin America, those are unique American capabilities that we are not capable of replacing, and therefore there is something in it for us for the future as well.
Right. While the mic goes there, you have a question. You have the mic in your hand.
Yes, sir. Hi, sir. Has this war permanently changed the Europe test in diplomacy with Russia? Has this war permanently changed the trust in diplomacy with Russia?
Yeah, obviously. When a head of state publicly lies, these are not my men in Crimea, and then both publicly and in bilateral conversations with the President of France, with the Chancellor of Germany and others, trust me, I have absolutely no intention of invading Ukraine. How, that changes diplomacy. You cannot trust that person anymore. When a state signs solemnly a treaty on delineating the border, remember, Ukraine and Russia have a border treaty signed by Vladimir Putin, ratified in the Duma, and those are the international borders that we recognize. Even earlier, Budapest Memorandum, 94, the main guarantor of Ukrainian independence and inviolability of borders was Russia. Why? In exchange for what was then the third largest nuclear arsenal. So Ukraine gave it up in return for those guarantees, and then they're trampled upon. How can you trust such a country?
Hello, sir. I wish to ask that Poland is neighbor with Ukraine. So I wish to ask that how has the war actually changed the economy? Because obviously there are Ukrainian refugees walking in Poland as well. So how has it changed your economy, and what has Poland done for it?
So the effects are mixed. On the one hand, we've had some costs, military assistance, financial assistance, all that traffic through Poland, of course, uses our infrastructure. That's on the debit side. On the plus side, Ukraine stopped trading with Russia. So, for example, all the petrol, all the spare parts, everything that Ukraine needs, which Europe mostly pays for, is mostly purchased either in Poland or travels through Poland. And of course, we didn't have a 10% reserve in our health system, in our educational system to receive the refugees. But the Ukrainian refugees have been exceptionally hardworking. So the participation of Ukrainian refugees, mostly women actually, in the Polish labor force is higher than Poles. And they have reduced our deficit in our pension system, and they have paid taxes. We hope conditions will come into being so that they can go home. And of course, when you have, and you know something about it, when you have millions of refugees, inevitably there is some friction. But on the whole, I'm proud of what Poland did early on. We received over 1 million people without a single refugee camp.
So we'll take last two questions together on this side, please. Take it back. Back. Yeah, go on. There are some hands raised on the yeah.
Dziękuję bardzo. I am from Berlin, and so recently we had a security conference where NATO declared that it's most likely will be at war with Russia in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'd love to get your take on whether that's plausible and or probable, and if so, what we can do to prepare for that.
Well, thank you for that question, because I sometimes feel that in Germany, a hard-hearted discussion about the threat is not fashionable. For example, we track very carefully of the Russian deployment of nuclear medium-range missiles, both in Belarus and in the Kaliningrad exclave, and the ones from Kaliningrad have a range to reach Berlin. And in Berlin, they don't seem to be worried about it, which always surprised me. A Russia that cannot conquer Donbass for 4 years is not capable of conquering Europe. But what I'm telling you is that Russia's capabilities are less than we imagined and that Putin imagined. But his intentions are much worse than most of Germany imagined. And therefore, if we were to permit him to overwhelm Ukraine, he would need, as your defense chiefs say, 3 to 5 years to retool and to go further. And this is the time that the Ukrainians, through their sacrifice, have given us to start taking defense seriously. We need to do what President Trump is telling us, which is to spend the money on defense by the end of the decade to be capable of deterring, not fighting. If we do a good job, we will successfully deter Putin and he will not dare attack us.
Right, the very last question there, and then we can thank Mr. Minister. Yes, please.
Hi. So you're currently in India, a country which continues to have a very strong relationship with Russia. It has bought, despite the Ukraine war, it continues to buy Russian oil, buy Russian arms. So how complicit do you think is India in the ongoing invasion of Ukraine and Putin's kind of ongoing conflict?
Well, there is history to this. India used to be a leader of the non-aligned movement, and at that time it bought massive amounts of Russian equipment, which is failing in Ukraine. So I hope there's a lesson in that. But of course, that means India needs the spare parts and so on, and we get that. And that when Russia lost its most lucrative markets for its oil and gas in Europe, which is one of the costs of the war, India snapped up some of that stuff at much reduced prices. What I told Dr. Jai Shankar in Paris at our Weimar Triangle meeting with India is that we are pleased that Indian refineries have started reducing those purchases. We all need to make a contribution to make Putin realize that this war is unacceptable.
And we have the youngest member in the JLF.
Very good, very good.
Who has to ask you a question.
Hi everyone, I am Aram. And my question is that there are many humanitarian laws and many discussions in the previous UNHRC meeting in October 2025. But still there are many human right violation happening in the crisis going on. So what can nations collectively do to reduce that?
there have always been human rights violations, and we should try to limit them. And we don't need to be heroic, we just need to abide by the rules that already obtain. The UN Charter, in Europe we have Organization for Security and Justice. We should respect the independence of our judiciaries, freedom of the press. Democracy is not just the rule of majority, it's also the respect for minorities. We know the principles, we need to stick to them.
Mr. Minister, dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a hand